Yeah. Okay. Any quick reflections from yesterday? Anyone? Where we left? This is the place we left. Is that right? He wrote the. Ramanuja wrote his own impressions to his friend Mukunda about how we need to take care of Prabhupada. His need to get ready with a heart doctor. Is my voice clear?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, is heart doctor and all these preparations. He said we need to take care of him, good care of him. Something he wrote. I think this is where we ended. Okay. Knowing that Swamiji would soon be returning, the devotees in America began to increase their entreaties, each group asking him to come to their particular city. On November 4th, Prabhupada wrote Mukunda, as you say that my absence is being felt now, surely more deeply than ever, so I also feel to start immediately without waiting. And to Mukunda's wife Janaki, he wrote, every minute I think of you, and as you asked me to go to San Francisco while returning from India, I'm trying to fulfill my promise. I'm thinking of going directly to San Francisco. At the bottom of the same letter to Mukunda and Janaki, Achutananda added a health report. Swamiji is looking healthy and living and working regularly, but his pulse rate is generally too fast. Last night it was 95, unusually fast even for him, as it generally hovers between 83 and 86. Prabhupada decided not to wait any longer on the chance that Mukunda might secure him permanent residency. I want to return to your country, where there's a good air and good water. He told Achitananda one day. Every day we are receiving letters that the devotees want me there. I thought that in my absence they might deteriorate, and I was reluctant to even come to India. But now I see that it is growing. There's need for me to go and supervise the expansion. So I want to go back. Prabhupada is saying to Achitananda. The only impediment now seemed to be a delayed P form, a clearance from the Bank of India required for an Indian citizen traveling abroad. I'm just ready for starting for America, but as you know, our competent government is very slow in action. The P form was submitted almost a month ago, but still it is undergoing red tapeism. The visa was granted to me within half an hour. The passage money was deposited within 2 days, but unfortunately, the Reserve Bank of India is delaying the matter unnecessarily. I expect the P form at any moment, and as soon as I get it, I shall start for your country. Just to make certain that Swamiji would come first to San Francisco, Mukunda sent a telegram to Calcutta. Mukunda sent a telegram to Calcutta. Swamiji, Brahmananda and I agree you start immediately. Swamiji, Brahmananda and I agree you start immediately. Advise exact arrival date, Mukunda. So here now Prabhupada said, I'm going to start as soon as devotees heard in America, they are very excited. And interestingly, Prabhupada's, he didn't expect, but with Prabhupada's absence, they are growing and they're doing well. That's very nice thing actually to hear. That's a wonderful thing. See, I'm taking a lot of inspiration from this, particularly from this section. Hope our community will also grow big. So now everybody is getting ready. Everyone is inviting him to go there. Prabhupada thought, if I'm not there, I didn't plan to come here because I was worried how they will do. They're doing well. And he writes to Janaki also that I'm keeping my promise that I'll come to San Francisco. first. I need to go to many different places. Here also his health is not that great, but seems okay. Now, see, he cannot wait for permanent rest because his time is very crucial. He cannot waste the time for this. That's why he wanted to go and take up the, maintaining the growing Krishna conscious movement. Come back soon, as soon as possible. Now he's saying that in your country, water, air is good. So I might improve my health. And he's complaining about the Indian system. Visa he got, ticket he got, but State Bank of India is not clearing the P form. Earlier it was needed. I think now also there is some clearance is required, right? Police clearance, if you all know. I think this is the part of P form. Anyone who wants to go to foreign, there's some clearance needed. You all know, right? Many of you may have forgotten, but I think we did some clearance. The police clearance is required for Indian citizens before we leave. So here, Mukunda writes to that Brahmanand, and I agree that you start immediately. Advise exact arrival date. Mukunda writing a telegram. Okay, Mr. AJ, please.
I'm just ready. Prabhupada had planned his route through Tokyo, intending to stop for a day to probe if there is any possibility of starting a center. In Tokyo, he would let Mukunda know by telephone his arrival time in San Francisco, but 3 weeks passed while Prabhupada continued to wait for his P form. Meanwhile, he received good news from New York. The Macmillan Company's interest in Bhagavad Gita was real. The contract was being drawn. Pleased with Brahmananda, he wrote to him on November 11th explaining his visions for distributing Krishna conscious literature. If publications are there, we can work from one center only, like New York or San Francisco, for propagating our cult all over the world. Let us stick to the publication of BTG more and more nicely and publish some Vedic literatures like Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, etc. As Prabhupada's mind turned more to the preaching that awaited him in America, he assessed what he had done so far, what he would do, and the process by which he would do it. I'm not in agreement with Mr. Altman that we are expanding very thinly. In my opinion, a single sincere soul can maintain a center. You know, I started the center at 26 2nd Avenue alone. I took the risk of $200 per month for rent. At that time, there were no assistants. Mukunda was at that time a friend, but there was no responsibility for him maintaining the center. Gradually, Kirtananda and Hayagriva joined, but they did not take any responsibility. Still, I was maintaining the establishment, simply depending on Krishna, and then Krishna sent me everything, men and money. Similarly, if a sincere soul goes out and opens a center in any part of the world, Krishna will help him in all respects. Without being empowered by Krishna, nobody can preach Krishna consciousness. It is not academic qualification or financial strength which helps in these matters, but it is sincerity of purpose which helps us always. Therefore, I wish that you, Brahmananda, will remain in charge of New York. Let Satsvarupa be in charge of Boston. Let Mukunda be in charge of San Francisco. Let Janardhan be in charge of Montreal. Let Nadarani and Dayananda be in charge of Los Angeles. And let Subal Das be in charge of Santa Fe. In this way, you will follow my example as I did in the beginning of 26 2nd Avenue. That is preaching, cooking, writing, talking, chanting, everything one man's work. I never thought about the audience. I was prepared to chant if there was no man to hear me. The principle of chanting is to glorify the Lord and not to attract a crowd. If Krishna hears nicely, then he will ask some sincere devotee to gather in such place. Therefore, be advised that thousands of centers may be started if we find out a sincere soul for each and every center. We do not require more men to start. If there is one sincere soul that is... He stole the last line from me. There we go. If there is one sincere soul that is sufficient to start a new center. That is sufficient to start a new center. So... as Prabhupada's getting ready to head back to America, he goes to Tokyo and he finds out that Macmillan Company is drawing up the contract to print Bhagavad Gita, and he's kind of reflecting on the past and the present and his future plans, and he writes to Mukunda and he says, like, when I started 26 Second Avenue, I did it all by myself. I had nobody there to help me. It was to Brahmananda. I had nobody there to help me. It was just me. And I was, I knew that Krishna was there to help me. So I took on the risk and the responsibility. And, as a result, he feels that, Brahmananda should solely take over responsibility for the New York Center. And then he kind of goes through who's gonna own the rest of not own, but who's gonna manage the rest of the centers that exist already throughout the U.S. and in Canada. But yeah, they also talk about book distribution and he's saying, hey, BTG is what, Bhagavad Gita?
No, Back to Godhead.
Oh, Back to Godhead. Ooh, it's my first day.
We should sign. No, we read it back.
Yeah. I know. So yeah, he's saying let's focus on Back to Godhead a little more, and we'll put out some additional books as well. But yeah, the line that sticks out in this chapter or in this section is at the bottom there, right? If Krishna hears nicely, then he will. Well, sorry, where was it? It was
here.
Yeah, right. If Krishna hears nicely, then he will ask some sincere devotee to gather in such place. So. It just, he was saying he was depending on Krishna, and Krishna sent him everything he needed. And, he never thought about, the audience or people showing up or, how many people were there, how many people were paying attention. He said, I was ready to do this if nobody was going to listen. I was ready to chant. So, he's telling Brahmananda, you can do this, you can handle this, and all it takes is a sincere soul. And if we can find 1,000 sincere souls, we can open 1,000 centers.
This section is very enlivening and encouraging session. And it encourages everyone. There are hardly 2 months, 3 months devotees.
Yeah.
They already, not only they are working on, they already opened the centers. And Prabhupada has a full faith that they will do. He's talking about thousands, because there's a constant war between Maya, and Prabhupada had personally that war. And for devotees, there has to be a war. It looks like we have to get into this war, otherwise nothing will happen. The interesting thing is here, Prabhupada had planned his route through the Tokyo, intending to stop for a day to probe if there's any possibility of starting a center. You see, wherever he's going, as if we take a break and we see what is the culture. But Prabhupada is already in his mind, even though everything is new for him, to open a center, Krishna Conscious Center. He's so confident that is going to happen. I hope we all will, take every moment of this we are hearing into our heart. Okay, second go.
On November 12th, Srila Prabhupada wrote to Krishna Devi, I am coming soon to San Francisco. I shall let you know the exact date sometime next week. I am coming over very soon to see you when everything will be adjusted. Hope you are well. And the health notes from Achyutananda continue to arrive. Please tell the devotees out there to take good care of him. It is a very hard task trying to restrain him from overcooking himself, but they must be strict. He still has to take his medicines and get his massage every day. On November 20th, Prabhupada dispatched by boat to New York more than 800 copies of the first 3 volumes of his Srimad Bhagavatam. And on the next day, his P-form finally cleared. Immediately, he booked passage on Pan American Airlines and sent a cable informing Mukunda that he would arrive in San Francisco on November 24th at 12:45 p.m. But again, his departure was delayed, this time by a strike by the Communist Party in Calcutta. Businesses closed, cars, buses, rickshaws, and trains stopped running. Riots broke out. There were murders and assassinations. Meanwhile, Prabhupada remained at the Radha Govind temple. My return to your country is already settled, but due to a petty revolution in Calcutta, I am not able to leave. Our San Francisco friends may be very anxious because I sent them 2 telegrams, one informing them of my arrival and the other cancelling it. Future arrangements are pending. 2 weeks passed. While waiting in his room for the political strike to end, Prabhupada received a letter from Umapati, one of the devotees he had initiated at the first initiation in New York, in September of 1966. Umapati had given up practicing Krishna consciousness for half a year, but now he wrote to say he was back. Prabhupada replied, "It is my duty to deliver you the right thing in right earnestness, and it is the duty of the receiver to act in the standard spiritual regulation. When you left us, I simply prayed to Krishna for your return to Krishna consciousness, because that was my duty. Any good soul who approaches me once for spiritual enlightenment is supposed to be depending on my responsibility to get him back to Krishna, back to home. The disciple may misunderstand a bona fide spiritual master, being obliged to do so under the pressure of Maya's influence. But a bona fide spiritual master never lets go a devotee once accepted. When a disciple misunderstands a bona fide spiritual master, the master regrets for his inability to protect the disciple, and sometimes he cries with tears in the eyes. We had an experience while my Guru Maharaj was alive. One of his disciples who accepted sannyas was one day forcibly dragged by his wife. My Guru Maharaj lamented with tears in his eyes, saying that he could not save the soul. We should always, therefore, be careful of being attacked by Maya's influence, and the only means of guarantee is to chant Hare Krishna offenselessly. So here, basically, Prabhupada wrote to Krishna Devi saying that he's going to come to San Francisco, and then even Achitananda wrote back. He also wrote to the devotees to tell them to take good care of Prabhupada, that his heart, not restrain him from overworking, and he still has to take his medicines and massage every day. And then on November 20th, Prabhupada sent 800 copies of the first 3 volumes of his Srimad Bhagavatam to New York. And the next day, his P form finally cleared. Then he booked the flight ticket to San Francisco. Again, he thought he was going to go, and this time his departure got delayed because of an political strike by the CPI party in Calcutta, Communist Party. And Prabhupada basically writes back, so 2 weeks have passed, waiting for the political strike to end, and he gets a letter from Umapati where Umapati was there as part of the first initiation ceremony in New York, and he had fallen down, and he writes to Prabhupada that he is back. And Prabhupada writes back to him saying that when you left, the spiritual master is always very sad when somebody leaves the movement due to the Maya's influence. And sometimes a disciple may fall down, but the bona fide spiritual master, he never lets go of the devotee once he is accepted. And he also shares an example with his Guru Maharaj when one of the Guru Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj disciples accepted sannyas, and he was forcibly dragged by his wife. And his Guru Maharaj felt sad with tears in his eyes, saying that he could not save the soul.
Prashanti?
Prabhuji, I will listen today.
Okay. Nipa?
When Prabhupada received news of quarreling in the Los Angeles temple, he replied to Nandarani, "I know that my presence is very urgently required. Arrangement is already completed and circumstances alone have checked my departure. Please therefore don't be worried. I'm coming to your place within a fortnight." At the end of the first week of December, the strike ended, and Srila Prabhupada again booked passage. You will be pleased to know that I have purchased my ticket for New York via Tokyo and San Francisco. I'm starting tomorrow morning at 9:30. By evening, reaching Tokyo via Bangkok and Hong Kong. I shall rest 24 hours in Tokyo, and on the 14th at night, I'm starting for San Francisco. By local time, I'm reaching San Francisco on the same day, the 14th at 12:45 p.m. by PAA 846. Yesterday, I have sent one telegram to this effect, and I hope I shall reach there safely as scheduled. I'm so glad to learn that Prata and Brata and yourself are trying to get the teachings of Lord Chaitanya published. You do not know how pleased I am to hear this news. When one book is published, I think I've conquered an empire. So try to publish as many books as possible, and that will enhance the beauty and prestige of our society. The impersonalist mission has nothing to say substantial, but because they have money and published so many rubbish literatures, they have become very cheaply popular. You can just imagine how much powerful our society will become when we have as many substantial literatures published. We should not only publish in English but also in other important languages such as French and German. When the day for Prabhupada's departure finally arrived, he gave last instructions to Achyutananda and Ramanuj. Just pray to Lord Krishna that I can go to America, he requested Achyutananda. How can I? Achyutananda replied. You will be leaving me. No, Srila Prabhupada replied. We will always remain packed up together if you remember my teachings. If you preach, you will become strong, and all these teachings will be in the proper perspective. When we stop our preaching, then everything becomes stagnant and we lose our life. Even here in India, people think that they know everything, but they are wrong. There is no end to hearing about Krishna. God is unlimited. So no one can say, I know everything about God. Those who say they know everything about God do not know. So everyone will appreciate you. Do not fear. So here, Prabhupada hears about the quarreling news in the LA temple. Uh, So he replies to Nandarani and he says that his presence is definitely required there. Arrangement is completed and don't worry, he'll be coming within a fortnight. And at the end of the first week of December, when the strike ended, Prabhupada booked the passage. And he wrote to Nandarani that he will be pleased to know that he has purchased the ticket via Tokyo for New York and San Francisco. And he's starting tomorrow at 9:30 and will be reaching via Bangkok and Hong Kong. He'll be resting in Tokyo for 24 hours and will be reaching San Francisco on the same day, the 14th at 12:45 p.m. by PAA 846. And Prabhupada also mentions about the telegram he had sent, and he says hope he will reach there safely as scheduled. He's also glad to learn about Satyabrata and yourself are teaching of Lord Chaitanya being published. He's when the one book he says when one book is published, he thinks he has conquered an empire. So try to publish as many books as possible. This will enhance the beauty of our society. There are so many articles which are not substantial, which are rubbish literatures and have become popular cheaply. So he thinks with these articles published, it's like, it will give some weightage. And he says it should not only be published in English, but also in other important languages such as French and German. And when Prabhupada's departure day finally arrived, he gave instructions to Achyutananda and Ramanuja saying, just pray to Lord Krishna that I can go to America. He requested Achyutananda. And Achyutananda replied, how can I? You will be leaving me. So Prabhupada replies saying, no, we will always remain packed if you remember the teachings. If you preach, you will become strong and the teachings will be in the proper perspective. When we stop the preaching, then everything will become stagnated. And people in India think they know everything, but this is wrong. There's no end to hearing about Krishna. God is unlimited. So no one can say I know everything about God. Those who say that they know everything about God, uh, so every I mean those who say they know everything about God do not know. So everyone will appreciate you. Do not fear.
Very nice. Thank you so much. Isn't it amazing? Prabhupada leaving Achyutananda and what is that name? Ramanuja. In India, he's going by himself. Or Ramanuja is going with him. I think Ramanuja would be going. No. He's going by him. He's coming by himself. Leaving Achyutananda and Ramanuja to development of the temple, India. It's so wonderful to hear. Okay, Ranathu, you can read.
Hare Krishna. Achutananda. When I returned to the room after sending off Swamiji and paying my obeisances at the airport, I felt a void. I felt very lonely and rather weak. I returned to the room in front of Sri Sri Radha Govinda and chanting on my beads, I started pacing back and forth. What will I preach? The black and white marble floor passed under me. I stepped on the cracks, in between the cracks, and on the black and white marble again and again. Then I realized I wasn't seeing Radha Krishna. So I sat down directly in front and saw the brilliant form of Radha Govindaji, and my eyes filled with tears. Srila Prabhupada spent his stopover in Tokyo mostly in going to his hotel and checking into a room, bathing, resting, eating, and returning to the airport the next day in time for his flight to San Francisco. But he did speak with a government secretary, explaining that Krishna consciousness was a universal philosophy for reviving a person's original eternal consciousness. And he explained the crucial need for Krishna consciousness in human society. The secretary, however, said he felt certain that the Japanese government wouldn't be able to help a religious movement. Prabhupada was annoyed. The supposedly educated man was so ignorant as to mistake Krishna consciousness for merely another sectarian religion. Prabhupada wanted intelligent men to try to understand Krishna consciousness and understand that the Gita was actual knowledge, transcendental knowledge, beyond the inferior knowledge of the senses and the mind. But he had his plane to catch. Japan would have to wait. The passengers and flight crew saw Prabhupada as an elderly Indian man dressed in saffron robes. The stewardesses weren't sure at first whether he spoke English, but when he asked them for fruits, they saw that he could and that he was a kind gentleman. He was quiet, putting on his glasses and reading from an old book of Indian scripture for hours at a time, or moving his lips in prayer while fingering Indian prayer beads in a cloth pouch, or sometimes resting beneath a blanket, his eyes shut. So Prabhupada had left to America, and Achitananda was, kind of lost, or was feeling a big void. And, obviously it took him a while to get his act together, but he was going back and forth, and then he finally realized that he was sitting in front of the brilliant form of Radha Govindji, and his eyes filled with tears. Then we started reading about Prabhupada's return journey and his stopover in Tokyo. And even there, for that short period, he was trying to talk to a government secretary in Japan, explaining Krishna consciousness and how it was a universal philosophy. But the secretary was, was I guess was a little strongly saying that the Japanese government won't be able to help in this movement, and Prabhupada was annoyed primarily because he was thinking this was some other sectarian religion, but not able to understand the importance and the knowledge that it's transcendental knowledge. But Prabhupada had to leave, and Japan had to wait for Krishna consciousness to be preached there. And then Prabhupada's flight journey, it's explained that Prabhupada was primarily quiet, spending his time reading, chanting, and resting.
Thank you. Srikar or Sridhar?
No one knew or bothered to inquire into what he was doing. They didn't know that anxious young hearts were awaiting him in San Francisco, or that the Macmillan Company in New York wanted to publish his English translation of Bhagavad Gita, or that he had spiritual centers in 2 countries with plans for expansion all over the world. Prabhupada sat patiently, chanting often, his hands in his bead bags, depending on Krishna as the hours passed. After a 10-hour flight, the plane landed in San Francisco. Standing with hundreds of other passengers, Prabhupada gradually made his way to the exit. Down the long attached tunnel, even before he reached the terminal building, he could see Govinda Dasi and few other disciples smiling and waving on the other side of the glass partition. As he entered the terminal building, he moved towards the glass and his disciples dropped to their knees, offering obeisances. As they raised their heads, he smiled and continued walking down the corridor while they walked alongside, only the glass partition separating them. Then they disappeared from his view and he walked down the stairway towards immigration and customs. The downstairs area was also glassed in, and Prabhupada could see more than 50 devotees and friends waiting eagerly as they again caught sight of him. They cried out as a group, Hare Krishna. Swamiji looked wonderful to them, tanned from his 6 months in India, younger and more spiritually. He smiled and triumphantly held up his hands in greeting. Devotees were crying in happiness. As Prabhupada stood in line at the customs inspection point, he could hear the devotees' kirtan, the glass walls only partially masking the sound. The custom officials ignored the chanting, although the connection between the saffron-robed passenger and the joyful chanter was not hard to see. Srila Prabhupada waited in line, glancing now and then at his chanting disciples. Since he had already sent ahead the 800 books and several crates of musical instruments, he had only one suitcase to place on the table before the inspector. Methodically, the inspector went through the contents: cotton saris for the girls, silk garlands for the Jagannath deities, kartals, saffron dhotis, and kurtas, a coconut grater, and a little bottle of Ayurvedic medicine. So, and so here it's a description like on the flight, there were many passengers, but Srila Prabhupada was softly chanting on his beats. So nobody, no other people on in the plane bothered or they knew about, inquired about what Srila Prabhupada was doing. They did not know that there were so many young Americans waiting for him in San Francisco. And then there was one big Macmillan company in New York, which was like waiting to publish, which was wanting to publish Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita in English. And then nobody also knew that Srila Prabhupada already had 2 centers in 2 countries. And then there were many plans for expansion all over the world. So Prabhupada, while on the plane, he sat patiently chanting sometimes, and then he was like completely depending on Krishna. And then as the hours passed, so about after 10 hours, the plane landed in San Francisco. So Srila Prabhupada, after coming out of the airplane, he was standing with hundreds of other passengers in a line, and then he gradually made his way to the exit. So there was a long tunnel that he had to pass through in the airport, and then even before he reached the terminal, he could see some of his devotees like Govinda Dasi and few other disciples smiling and waving, but they were very far and on the other side of the glass partition. And then, so as he entered the terminal, he went closer to the glass, and then all his disciples they offered obeisances to him. And then there's a beautiful description between and how the reciprocation between Srila Prabhupada and all his disciples here. So everybody, they raised their hands, they smiled, and then they were walking down the corridor, and Srila Prabhupada was on one side of the glass partition while his disciples were on the other side. So as he came downstairs again deeper into the terminal, he saw that from the glass wall there were more than 50 devotees and other friends waiting for him. And then as soon as they saw Srila Prabhupada, they all chanted Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada also reciprocated. He looked to all these devotees. Srila Prabhupada looked more younger and then more spiritually. So, and then as soon as they chanted Hare Krishna, even Srila Prabhupada in return, in reciprocation, he smiled and held up his hand in greetings. And then all devotees were crying in happiness and ecstasy. So again, Srila Prabhupada stood in line at the customs inspection point. And then distantly you could hear the devotees kirtan. But the customs officials, they all ignored the chanting, although I mean, they did not know the connection between Srila Prabhupada and the other devotees chanting outside. So, so Srila Prabhupada waited for his turn for inspection in line, and then while waiting, he would sometimes glance at his devotees, I mean, who were chanting. And then Srila Prabhupada already sent a lot, 800 books and various musical instruments. So he only had one suitcase that he wanted to submit for inspection. So the inspector he looked into his suitcase, and then there were some saris, cotton saris, which Srila Prabhupada brought from India for his disciples. There were some silk garlands for the deities, kartals, and then some saffron dhotis and kurtas, and then some little bottles of Ayurvedic medicines.
What are these?
I wonder how the coconut grater is there. Is it, you used to get coconut? I don't know. You were not there. I'm talking about 60s. They used to coconut used to be imported here. I don't know. Anyway, so just checking. Yes, Sridhari, you can.
What are these? The inspector broke. The little bottles looked strange, and he called for another inspector. A delay. Swamiji's disciples became perturbed by the petty-minded customs inspectors, poking through Swamiji's things, now opening the tightly corked bottles, sniffing and checking the contents. The inspector seemed satisfied. Prabhupada tried to close his suitcase, but he couldn't work the zipper. Another delay. The devotee, still anxiously chanting, watched as Swamiji, with the help of the gentleman behind him, managed to zip his suitcase closed. Swamiji walked towards the glass doors. The devotees began chanting madly. As he stepped through the door, a devotee blew a conch shell that resounded loudly throughout the hall. Devotees garlanded him, and everyone pressed in, handing him flowers. He entered their midst as a beloved father enters and reciprocates the embrace of his loving children. So the inspector was.
Yes, go ahead.
So the inspector was asking Prabhupada, what are all these things and what are those strange bottles? So he wasn't understanding, and he called for another inspector. So they were thoroughly checking all his things, and he was even opening the tightly corked bottles, and they were sniffing and even checking the other contents. So there was the delay, and but the inspectors seemed satisfied. But again, there was another delay because Prabhupada couldn't close his suitcase. So a gentleman behind him managed to close his suitcase. And after that, Swamiji was walking towards the glass doors, and all the devotees began chanting madly. And one of the devotee blew a conch shell, which was resounding the hall, throughout the hall. And some devotees garlanded him. Like everyone were very happy that Prabhupada came. Uh, they were the scene was like um, they treated Prabhupada as their father, and he was reciprocating the embrace of by embracing his loving children.
Thank you. This is wonderful. And before I say anything, I wanted to say, Sridhari, thank you for joining. Sridhari was in the temple when I went to Dr. Subal. She was doing some service. I asked her what is the reason we've been missing it. So she says she's listening from the kitchen. I requested to join because, and thank you for listening and accepting my word and join. Isn't it nectar? I feel like when I read this, I feel like I'm really seeing Prabhupada's activities personally, face to face, as if like I'm with them. How many of you feel up to some extent? I'm sure everybody must be feeling the part of it. Otherwise, we won't read this together for months. I'm feeling, yeah, I'm feeling with really a lot being with Prabhupada constantly, even though we were not in 1960s. This is the transcendental connection. And I wish all our community take this opportunity. Maybe after we finish this, you all do different reading groups again and make everyone read about and Sridhar, thank you so much for joining. So it is a very beautiful chapter. Anyone wants to say something before we start the next one? Any reflections? Quick.
I was going to say, and you had mentioned it earlier. It's just crazy to me that, the devotees who had been with Prabhupada for like 2, 3, 4 months. He's like, okay, cool. You're in charge of an ISKCON center now. Have a great time. Have the best of luck. Krishna's with you. It's just it's wild when you think about it that that with such a I don't want to say not a strong foundation, but I mean with such an inexperienced group to start with, that things didn't crumble instantly. You know what I mean? Like, imagine if you were starting a company and you said, you know what, you've worked here for 2 months now, I want you to go out and open your own store. Like you're in charge of the Western, part of the country for our company now. And no, you don't see that happen. It's wild that he was able to do that and had the foresight to pick the right people, it seems, to assign the right people for those positions, or at least that's how it sounds now. We'll see, I guess, if it works out in further chapters, but yeah.
No, it's a very good point you brought up, because it's just few months. That's the truth. In spirituality, we see there's 2 things: our endeavor and Krishna's mercy. Only thing is there's a complete faith on each other. The spiritual master and disciple, there's a complete faith and very good understanding, and that's why they felt empowered, and they had a desire also. So these things it helps us to know, no, we don't have to wait for 30 years to do some serious efforts in our movement. We really can start immediately. I can share when I joined 1999, but somehow I had in 2001 I already had a deep desire to have the temple, but I could not manifest here at all. So we really don't have to wait. Everybody can take that. We have a big congregation. We have tons of people at this time. We don't realize that we have tons of people. But all we need to do is understand the mood of our movement. If we do that and we act in that direction, we will never be jobless. We'll be always taken care, and we will see Krishna conscious movement is going to grow and grow. It's not me, and Prabhupada himself is saying that, all of us, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying that, take it. It's not just attending Sunday Feast program and going home, and then what will happen is we will forget everything. It's understanding the emergency, and more than that, I feel that how grateful to have. I'm feeling I'm very fortunate to be this. It's not a what do you call it? The right word. It's a privilege to represent, to serve this Vaishnava. Those who are coming from the Vedic culture, they know, actually already they know what the greatness of this movement. Vaishnava is the highest. People don't take it. It's a privilege that we got this service. Tomorrow, Pranath Prabhu is scheduling for the books. Those who want, he's online now. At least this situation, he's trying to work on online. We read a lot about Prabhupada's sincere desperate about giving out, publishing books and giving out. So tomorrow is also called set up. Is it 3 o'clock, right? 3:30.
3 o'clock, Prabhu.
3 o'clock. I mean, I think everyone can be part of it. Just show we are united. Be together. Let's be together to this moment. Any other comments before we move? We will start the next chapter. Achyutananda has been kept in India, left in India, Achyutananda and Ramanuja. Prabhupada had a different story, his situation. Achyutananda is like in foreign country. Americans can do, that's why they went to different part of the world. They're very courageous. And especially India is good, it's favorable but still it's the first time for him to be there and leading the movement. That's a big thing. Let's see what happens more. Should I move next? Anyone wants to share something on this? Do you all feel that while reading and hearing, do you all feel that you're connected so intimately with Prabhupada? You feel? I heard Rajesh mention. Do you all feel that?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yeah. Even though we didn't have to take birth during that time, now also I feel can still visualize Sasur Sai Maharaj put things so nicely. Okay, let's move to the next chapter, which is chapter 29, right? Oh, we are chapter 29. Unlimited opportunity, limited time here. Interesting. I'll read this one, then you all. No, I will not read. Who is Vijayanand Prabhu? Vijayanand Prabhu is going to read.
Montreal, August 1968. Srila Prabhupada was in his room, speaking with several disciples. So, Annapurna, you have got some news? He asked. Annapurna was a young British girl. A few months ago, her father had written from England that he might be able to provide a house if some devotees came there. Yes, she replied. So, what is your next program? She was reticent. That letter from your father is encouraging. Yeah. Yes, he encourages me, but he says he can't provide any place if we come there. Prabhupada looked disappointed. That's all right. It is up to Krishna. When we go to someone to preach, we have to stand before them with folded hands, with all humility. My dear sir, please take to Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada, Pradyumna spoke up. I was reading a book by this big atheist Swami. There are some letters in the back of the book, and I was looking at them. Atheist Swami's book, Prabhupada said, we have nothing to do with. I wasn't looking at his philosophy, Pradyumna replied. I was just looking at the techniques he used when he was in America. He wanted to go to Europe, so he had a man, a rich benefactor, who went on 6-week tour of France, England, Germany, Switzerland, Holland, and then back arranging lectures. That's how he did most of his tour. He had one or two influential people, and they arranged everything, and the lectures were arranged on their society. So you can arrange like that, Prabhupada asked. I was thinking that there would be a Royal Asiatic Society in London. I think Thakura Bhaktivinoda was a member of that. But where is Thakura Bhaktivinoda Sangha Association? Prabhupada asked. Well, Pradyumna continued. Still, there may be some people you could open correspondence with. They might be still interested in sponsoring you. Is there anything about Krishna in that Swami's speech? Prabhupada asked. No. Yeah, I will stop. Okay. Prabhupada said thoughtfully, in England, he would have no place to stay. Pradyumna might talk of influential persons traveling ahead and making all the arrangements. But where were those such persons? Here was a shy girl who could barely speak up, whose father would not help, and Pradyumna reading an atheist Swami and taking of a Royal Asiatic Society, but nothing practical. Prabhupada had plans, though. He had asked Mukunda and Shyamsundara to go to London and try to establish an ISKCON center. They had agreed and would be arriving in Montreal from San Francisco in a few days. So this looks like the events happening in Montreal, and here like Prabhupada was speaking with several disciples. Like one of such person was like Annapurna. She was a British young girl, and her father from England wrote that he will be able to provide a house if someone devotees come there. And Prabhupada was asking her like whether that letter from the father is encouraging, and she was mentioning like that letter was encouraging, but his father can't provide any place if they go there. And Prabhupada was looking disappointed, and he was mentioning that yeah, that's all right, because in when we go for preaching, we have to go with the folded hands and request people with humility, please, we need to request people like, my dear sir, please take to Krishna consciousness. And there was a person, Pradyumna, he was saying, like, he was sharing his thoughts on reading some of the information from a big atheist Swami, and Prabhupada was mentioning that it is not worth to share anything from the atheist Swami's book. But Pradyumna was mentioning that he was not interested in his philosophy, but he was he was looking into the techniques that the atheist Swami used when he was in America, and like how did that atheist Swami travel to Europe, as well as England, Germany, Switzerland, and Holland, and visiting all those places, because he had like influential people everywhere, and they arranged everything. So that is how he managed to tour all the countries and had the sessions over there. And Prabhupada was asking, like, if Pradyumna can arrange a session like that, and he was mentioning, like like there would be like a Royal Atheistic Society, Asiatic Society in London, and Bhaktivinoda Thakura was a member of that. And Prabhupada was asking if there is a where is that association of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but Pradyumna mentioning, like, but there are some people who will be interested in sponsoring. And then Prabhupada was inquiring if there is anything mentioned about Krishna in the speech, and for that answer was given no. And Prabhupada also thought that England would be like, in England they don't have no place to stay, but Pradyumna might talk of the influential person, but they could not find any influential person. They had one shy girl, but her father was not able to help. So Prabhupada had some plans, like he was thinking he asked Mukunda and Shyamsundara to go to London and establish a ISKCON center, and they had agreed, and they planned to be in Montreal from San Francisco in a few days.
Okay, thank you. Brajraj,
Yes. Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Dhanavad Pranam. Jai Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, Prabhupada's own spiritual master, had wanted Krishna consciousness in Europe. During the 1930s, he had sent his most experienced sannyasis to London, but they had returned. Nothing accomplished. It wasn't possible to teach Krishna consciousness to the Malichas. They had complained. Europeans couldn't sit long enough to hear the Vaishnava philosophy. One of the sannyasis had met Lord Zetland, who had inquired curiously, Swamiji, can you make me a Brahmana? The sannyasi had assured Lord Zetland he could, certainly, if Zetland would give up meat eating, intoxication, gambling, and illicit sex. Impossible, Lord Zetland had replied. And the sannyasis had accepted this response as the standard for all Europeans. The sannyasis had returned to India. Vaishnavism could never take hold in the West. Prabhupada had faith that his disciples would succeed. They would help him establish ISKCON centers in Europe, just as they had in North America. Certainly, such success would greatly please Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Prabhupada told of a man who found a gourd lying on the road and picked it up, and then found a stick and a wire and then picked them up. In themselves, the three parts were useless, but by putting the gourd, the stick, and the wire together, the man made a veena and began to play beautiful music. Similarly, Prabhupada had come to the West and found some rejected youths lying here and there, and he himself had been rejected by the people of New York City. But by Krishna's grace, the combination had become successful. If his disciples remained sincere and followed his orders, they would succeed in Europe. Three married couples, Mukund and Janaki, Shyamasundar and Malati, with their infant daughter Saraswati, and Gurudas and Yamuna arrived in Montreal, eager to travel to London. These three couples had begun the temple in San Francisco, where they had close association with Srila Prabhupada. They had helped Prabhupada introduce Kirtan Prasadam and Yath Yatra among the hippies of Haight Ashbury. Now they were eager to help him introduce Krishna consciousness in London. So here Satsur Maharaj is saying about Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Thakur, how he sent his disciples from Gaudiya Math, and they were not successful in the preaching as they incurred from one of the person Zetland who said no, and they made it a thumb rule for all the Europeans. So Prabhupada's idea was that as his disciples have helped him to start a temple in North America, his disciples can help him to start a center or temple in Europe, and that will please Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. So his meditation was to please his spiritual master. And then he is giving an example where a person is walking on the street and he is finding a rod and picked it up and found a stick, okay, god, stick, and wire. And Prabhupada says that these three are individually useless, but when they are combined together, they will become useful. And that man combined it together, made it into veena, and began to play beautiful music. So this is what Prabhupada says: cooperation. So that's how Prabhupada, he started his preaching in New York, and that's how Krishna's grace, the combination became successful. The rejected youths were preached. So then Prabhupada is Bhakti Sarup Damodar Maharaj saying is that in this small paragraph, three married couples, Mukund and Janki, Sham Sundar and Malati Mataji, and Gurudas ji, Prabhu and Yamuna Mataji, they went to, they were ready to go to London as they came to Montreal to meet Prabhupada. And they have already started, they were experienced in starting new centers in San Francisco. So they have also done Rath Yatra among the hippies of Haight Ashbury. So they were eager to help Srila Prabhupada. The eagerness was very much strong. So this is how Srila Prabhupada was empowering his disciples. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Very nice. So this is inspiration. Even though it's been put in very few words, but it is volumes of books. How the devotees are sacrificed. I think example for all of us. Let's see what happens. The thought of these devotees preaching in England made Prabhupada ecstatic. With a kirtan, they would become more popular than the yogis. With the gymnastics, yogis with their gymnastics and impersonal meditation. As the London program became a tangible fact, Prabhupada began to reveal more plans. Prabhupada already seemed to have hundreds of detailed plans for implementing Krishna consciousness around the world. He only needed willing helpers. Very nice. He only needed willing helpers. In the daily Kirtan rehearsals, Prabhupada taught the devotees to chant Hare Krishna and other devotional songs, beginning with a slow tempo and building gradually. He would gradually interrupt and have them begin again. Listening carefully as Yamuna led the chanting, Prabhupada would stop her at times to correct her Sanskrit pronunciation. So Prabhupada is getting them prepared with this before they go. After 2 weeks in Montreal, the London party came together for a final meeting with Prabhupada. He was sending them to start a center in London. I'm just so Prabhupada is in Montreal at this time. Montreal is in Canada, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Montreal is in Canada. Did Prabhupada land in Canada? I kind of disconnected there. Where he was. Did he land in Canada? I don't see when he went to Canada. Anyway, just checking. This geographical location is a little confusing to me. After 2 weeks in Montreal, the London party came together for a final meeting with Prabhupada. He was sending them to start a center in London to fulfill his spiritual master's dream. The sannyasis Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had sent to London, Prabhupada told them, had lectured in a few places, posted for photos with lords and ladies, and then returned to India. But Prabhupada wanted his disciples to go out boldly, not just tourism, and chant the holy name and attract others to chant. Lord Chaitanya had personally used this method while touring South India. Chaitanya Charitamrita describes that whoever saw Lord Chaitanya became ecstatic in love of God. Then that ecstatic person would chant the holy name and ask others to chant. And when they saw that person, they too would become ecstatic. Thus, the waves of ecstatic love of Krishna would increase. Prabhupada predicted that when the devotees chanted Hare Krishna, the people of London would hear the mantra, become devotees, and then enlighten others. Krishna consciousness would grow. The only requirement was that the chanting be done purely, without any material motivation. Prabhupada's enthusiasm was contagious, and as he spoke, he filled his disciples with the same contagious enthusiasm. Hare Krishna. So now devotees are, 3 families are ready. Gurudas, Mother Yamuna, Samsundar, and Prabhu and Mother Malti, along with Saraswati, the baby, and Mukunda and Janaki. They all are ready to go to London. They had a desire actually, and Prabhupada had desire, they had a desire to do. They all got and arrived Montreal. Prabhupada is kind of training something in few weeks in deep, a little bit on the kirtans everywhere, getting them ready. And here Prabhupada said that he gives example. He's telling them already. He's putting, see, the sannyasis has gone in the past. They put some posters and this, that, and they just came back. That's what you're not going for. You're going to is going to make some substantial work there, have nice kirtan, and people will certainly will be happy, attracted. Once they attracted, they will inspire others to take this process. So by hearing Prabhupada's enthusiasm, they also got inspired to, enthusiastic looks like, to take this contagious enthusiasm. They got it. Now they're ready to go. I don't think the more details will be put. They will go without any money or anything, it looks like. We will see the story later. Ajay, you please go on.
When Mukunda asked Prabhupada if he had any specific instructions, Prabhupada replied with a story. In his youth, he had once seen a movie of Charlie Chaplin. The setting was a formal ball held outdoors, and off from the main dance arena were lanes with benches where couples sat. Some mischievous boys had plastered glue on one of the benches, and a young man and his girlfriend came and sat down. When the young man got up, Prabhupada laughed as he told the story. His tails tore up the middle. Prabhupada told how the couple had returned to the dance, unaware of what had happened, but now they drew stares from the other dancers. Wondering why he was suddenly attracting so much attention, the young man went into the dressing room and saw in the mirror his ripped coattails. Deliberately, he had then tore his coat all the way up to his collar, returned to his partner, and began dancing exuberantly. Then another man joined, ripping his own coattails and dancing with his partner as if to compete with the first couple. One by one, the other dancers followed, ripping their coattails and dancing with abandon. By the conclusion of the story, the devotees in Prabhupada's room were all laughing uproariously. But finally, their laughter subsided and the meeting ended. Not until the devotees were already at the airport did Mukunda, talking with Syam Sundra, begin to appreciate and marvel at how expertly Prabhupada had answered his question. By their bold, enthusiastic, confident preaching, they would attract people. Not everyone would immediately join in the dancing, as had the people in the Charlie Chaplin film. The devotees might even be considered crazy at first, but they would be offering Krishna consciousness, the highest and rarest gift, and intelligent people would gradually appreciate this, even if at first they scoffed. By Srila Prabhupada's order, his London-bound disciples, holding kirtan in public, would present a profile quite different from the reserved profile of his sannyas godbrothers. His godbrothers had imitated the British ways, but Prabhupada wanted the British to imitate the Vaishnavas. To appear in the streets of London with shaven heads and dhotis would require boldness, but it would be exciting to chant, carrying out the orders of Lord Chaitanya, the order of Lord Chaitanya, and the people would follow. Gradually, but definitely, it will be the will of Lord Chaitanya. So Prabhupada relays a story. So I guess the question was, what were the instructions? How do you want us to go about this? And Prabhupada relayed a story about a Charlie Chaplin film he had seen when at some point, and it talks about this guy. He sits on a bench, and he sticks to the bench, and it rips his jacket up the back. So he goes back in, he starts dancing, and people are looking at him like he's crazy. He's got his jacket's ripped, and so the guy has no idea. So he goes into the bathroom and he sees, oh man, my jacket's ripped. What should I do? And he says, you know what? I'm just going to rip it all the way. So he rips it all the way up the back and goes back out there and starts dancing like a madman. And as other people see him, see how confident he is, and see, people are looking at him, and he's getting, I assume he's getting applause and accolades. They say, you know what? I'm going to do the same thing. So they rip their jackets as well. And next thing you know, the whole crowd is ripped. All the men in the dance competition have ripped their jackets up the back and are dancing without abandon. They're going nuts. And so, and at the time, everybody just thought this was kind of like just a funny anecdote, right? He's just telling a fun story from way back when. And Mukunda, talking to Sayam Sundra, he finally realizes what he meant. He's saying, you know what? Like, as long as we're confident, as long as we go out and we preach confidently, and we believe that, Krishna's guiding us, and we're serving properly and doing all these things, people will come to us. People will want to be a part of it. It's it's the importance of confidence and charisma. People are attracted to it, and and that's kind of what they're getting at. If we go out there and we're going to look a little weird, right? We're going to be cruising around London at the time. Shaved heads was not a thing for, unless you were one of the lower class, working class in England, I assume. So he's saying, hey, we're going to go out, we're going to wear dhotis, we're going to have our heads shaved. We're not going to try to be like Londoners. We're going to be Vaishnavas in London. And people are going to look at us and they're going to think that's weird, but, we're going to be so confident and believe in our message so strongly that they won't be able to help but be attracted to it as well. So.
Thank you. Did you read this one, right? Did you read this one? By Prabhupada's order, London disciples. Very nice. Thank you, Vijay. We have 3 minutes. Maybe we'll have a quick reflections more, and then we will continue tomorrow. Please share. We have not been doing reflections much. We have 3 minutes. Anyone want to share something?
Like the 3 families who started the temple in San Francisco, now they are taking Prabhupada's blessings, and they are starting in preaching in Europe. So they looks like all those 3 families are close to each other, and then they have Prabhupada's blessings to take the preaching into Europe. Where Prabhupada's godbrother, some people went, but they just went to give some lectures, took photos, and came back.
And remember, only blessings, no money. Do you all know the story that how they entered London? Do you all know? In order to enter the landed, in order to enter the country, they have to show why they have come and what money they are bringing, how much money they are bringing with them. Unbelievable work they have done. They got down. They had only some $1,500 something. They while staying that they arranged from Prabhupada. Then one family went out by showing this money. They sent that money back. So that how they managed, I have no idea. Mother Janaki, Yamuna explains. The Shyam Sundar Prabhu explains. Then another family showed the same money, and they entered. Then again, the third family also did the same thing. No money. They slept. They slept in this Saraswati, such a small child. They slept on the sometimes in the streets or the railway platform, like that kind of thing, in a cardboard. They had a very difficult times. They took big risks. So that's why they're glorified, and their acts have been put in the pages of Bhagavatam. Whether you all know or not, already know or not, all incidents are come in the Bhagavatam in one sense. It's part of Bhagavatam actually. Their acts are glorified like anything. Where they were and where they are now with their devotion. Just a little faith, convinced confidently, and they took risk for Krishna, they'll be glorified eternally. Thank you. Anyone else to say more? No? Okay. Yeah, please meditate on this. We will continue tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Prabhupada Lilamrita ki jai. Hare Krishna.